Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. That's probably all I need to say about it. Except maybe get ready, because this one's going to be a trip. Before we get into it, we just have to establish the rules. In naval combat, I can only use level 1 weapons and hull armor, and for Edward, the list is a little bit longer. No blending, no eagle vision, no viewpoints, no hiring factions, no upgrades, no tools, no weapons, no fists, and no killing. Takedowns can only be used if detection is a fail condition, otherwise enemies must be defeated by being knocked down and stomped out. A rule will not be considered broken if the specific action is required to progress the game. Our story begins, already in progress, with our hero Edward living his dream life as a rum smuggler. He figures the all-you-can-drink perk is well worth having the cops show up every couple weeks to sink all his ships. We try to fight them off, and it looks pretty grim, but Edward summons the power of Zeus, removing most of their health and making this battle incredibly easy. Just before their ship went down, this detective jumped over to ours and wanted to fight, but Edward told him not right now because it's time to fly. They both woke up on the beach with the detective mumbling something about needing to find a ride, but Edward wanted to go fishing. The detective seemed upset about that, so he wigged out and took off running. We wondered where he was going and went on a merry chase through the jungle. When he finally stopped, Edward decided to just kick his ass and rob him. In his pocket, we find plans to infiltrate a criminal organization by selling them this valuable crystal. Edward figured he could sell the crystal himself, so we drag the detective into a bush and take his shoes, then head down to a beach to find a lift to Cuba. There's some whiny turd down there being detained by the cops, but he has a ship, so we go help him out and get our first taste of combat. I struggled with the controls for a minute or so and took some damage, but once I got myself situated, I made quick work of them and rescued said whiny turd, who says his name is Steve and he's got a load of sugar to run down to Cuba. So yeah, sure, we can tag along. We take the wheel of the ship and hit the open water with our new friend Steve, and we're off to Havana to start the game. We disembark and get the obligatory follow this douchebag around town mission, and I have to climb up to this viewpoint where I'm forced into my first rule break by synchronizing. There's no time to worry about that right now. Some prick just robbed Steve, and we gotta chase him through town until we catch up to him on a rooftop, where we get to realign his vertebrae and take all his shit. Steve was waiting for us downtown, but Edward sensed liquor about, so we had to take a detour and follow his nose to the local pub. Some dude in there says he recognizes us, but we're trying to play it cool right now and tell him to shut the hell up. He took exception to that, and we get in our first bar fight, in which Edward very quickly proves that nobody gets between him and his drinking. Usually when the cops show up, it's time to go, but I was still in the mood for some fighting. In this particular instance, enemies will spawn indefinitely, so it took a little time and I kicked a lot of ass. I used this as an opportunity to work on my technique and find more ways to get a knockdown. I knew it wasn't going to end though, so I just kept going until I'd had enough. I took off back to the docks to see what Steve was saying. Turns out the cops kicked the shit out of him and took all his sugar. Edward says sucks to suck, then notices that they also took his crystal, so he's going to break into the evidence locker and get it back. Steve gets all mopey about it, but Edward doesn't really care. Before we can go to the police station, we have to find the captain and steal the key to the evidence lockup. Edward thought that was boring, so he stopped to check out the fish market on the way. It seems the captain likes to spend his free time just standing around in here staring at the walls, so we just gotta jump on his head, then hoof him in the crotch. His boys try to help him out, but there's no real threat here. Unlike the Ezio runs, a smaller space is actually beneficial to Edward's combat, and now I just have to steal the key and break into the police station. I've played this game quite a few times. I know exactly how to get up there quickly. I thought I could beat up the two guards at the top, but if I'm not paying attention and just spam the defense break for a knockdown, I'll keep pulling in human shields and killing them. The second try, I just went right for the door and fought them both out of the rifleman's line of sight, and now I just have to go in and retrieve our valuable crystal. Steve Sugar was in here too, but Edward decides to leave it behind because that guy's a dink. We get back to the docks to give Steve the bad news that we couldn't find his sugar, but he says that's fine, he didn't really need it anyway. They both had a good laugh and chatted for a while until Steve mentioned the crystal. Edward says he's got to go, as he just remembered he had something important to do. The next morning, Edward takes a moment to figure out where he is, then remembers it's time to sell the crystal, and he's just got to stop at the bar real quick for an eye-opener. There's a garden party going on at the buyer's house, and we strike up a chat with the governor and his creepy friend Flappy Jack, who take us to meet the boss. He seems like a bit of a dick, and he says his name is Larry. Edward says, "Cool story, bro," then asks if they want to buy this thing or not. Once the sale is complete, they offer up some lucrative goon work. They need some thugs for a security team to help transport a dangerous prisoner known as Parsley. Edward asks how dangerous this Parsley is, and the governor tells us to shut up and meet him tomorrow morning. Everybody meets up at the docks, and we get our first glimpse of this mysterious prisoner. Before we all head out, Larry has to get all up in Parsley's grill and goes on a long-winded old man rant while waving the crystal about. Edward wonders why this guy needs so much security, then remembers he's not being paid to ask questions. Of course, halfway there, he escapes and we have to chase him down. And the trick to these sequences is just stay at ground level and let the target come to us. As long as you don't take a wrong turn into a backyard with no exit, there shouldn't be any problems. We bring him back and Larry says he'll take it from here. Edward notices we're still only halfway to the prison and wonders why they think they need less security now. Then he forgot what he was thinking about and just took the money and met up with Steve at the bar. We tell him all about the weirdos we're working for and that during his rambling, Larry mentioned an ancient Crystal Head vodka distillery that can provide an endless supply of liquor to whoever controls it. Steve muses that this Parsley fellow might know more about it and we should go break him out of jail. Edward says that's a good idea as this story's starting to drag and he could really go for some action. First things first, we have to find the warden. This is supposed to be a stealth mission, but we're not allowed to sneak around in the stalking zones, which means I get to sprint straight to the warden and just whip his ass. After stealing the key, there's still no point in trying to sneak around. My usual plan is just run in and lure everyone out of sniper range and then give them all the day off. I took my time and played with them a bit, and once they were all down, I run to the door to see two dead guys. Edward says he didn't put them there, so we go inside and find out it's a trap. Flappy Jack set us up, and now we're going to jail. One sunny afternoon in jail, the guard came by with a nice meal for us, and our cellmate looked like he'd had enough. We busted off the shackles, beat the hell out of all the guards, then went upstairs to find out we've been on a boat this whole time. Edward says he likes boats, and he's going to keep this one, so Buddy helps us with the sails, and we escape into a tropical storm. Once the rain died down and the water calmed, Edward and his cellmate spoke to each other for the very first time. He says his name's Delio, and he moved here to make his living as a farmer, but it's not working out and asks if he can rent the room on the ship. Edward says no problem, bro, and we set sail for Nassau to do some shopping. This store was selling a badass skull jacket that Edward really wanted, but we can't afford it, so we ran to the bar to see if Scumbag Benny was there, as he's usually got some kind of scheme to make money. Of course he's there, and he tells us Mr. Beard is looking for some goons to rescue his buddy from the gallows. Edward loves doing goon work, so he's all in. Mr. Beard is very happy, but tells us they're dropping in about 3 minutes, so we'd better hurry. And this was definitely not a job for any ordinary goon. This was a turning point in the challenge. Saving this guy was a full stress test on the rules. I ran in the first time to check it out, to see what I was working with. When I get in range, a 30-second timer starts. Once I'm spotted, the guy drops, and I have 15 seconds from there to cut him down. Just barging in and trying to knock everyone out was not going to work. The best plan would be coming up from behind the gallows. A guard spawns in as I approach, but I was getting in there so quick that I didn't even actually notice him until much later. I got up behind the guy, but there was no button prompt and I was detected. That was the right way, though. I'd have to position myself just right before I climb up to be directly behind him and out of sight. But that was easier said than done, and I got really mad and just shot the damn rope. Don't worry, I came back, and yes, it can be done. This reattempt is where I finally noticed the guard spawn in, so I panicked and failed. Once I realized that he can't see me until he starts moving, I just had to make sure that I got up quickly and pixel perfect. I did, and I got him. Dude just casually strolled away as the captain kept talking about killing him. I had to cut it short though because I saw detection meters, and we head back into town for the most important part of the story. Our excited Edward runs to the store so he can finally buy his badass new skull jacket. He struts around downtown for a while to show it off, then we spot Mr. Beard down at the beach and we gotta go show him. He's down there smoking a bowl with Scumbag Benny, who starts acting like a dick, so Edward verbally castrates him, and in retaliation he makes us board a bunch of ships and take all their shit. Then he makes me upgrade the hull and cannons. I have no choice but to do it, so that means level 2 hull and broadsides are actually the starter gear. So then we rush back to show Mr. Beard this awesome new skull flag we got for the ship that matches our jacket. Everybody says how cool Edward is, and we all get wasted on the deck. Early the following morning, Delio says a letter came with a job offer for us. It's from Mary Reed, but her handwriting is atrocious, and now Edward thinks she's a man named Mark. We meet her at the beach, and Edward says she must be Mark. She thinks he's just messing around, so she makes fun of his new jacket and says we're going to go rob some farmers. She says we just got to go talk to that guy down by the docks, and he'll take us there. We were within range of him, but Edward noticed a guy on the beach slinging cheap tequila shots and said, "Go ahead, he'll catch up." We followed him to the plantation and into an eavesdropping mission. These can be a real pain in the ass, but it's all a matter of trial and error to find the right way to go. Not being able to blend makes them even trickier, but I can be clever sometimes, and I found the way to the checkpoint. And now I'm free to beat up everyone I see until I find the key to the warehouse, ending this mission and sending us back to our friends. Everyone starts talking about what they'd do if they won the lottery, and Edward brings up the distillery. He says if we can find it, we wouldn't need the lottery. Mr. Beard mentions Flappy Jack has a big house on an island and a galleon we could steal. That's got to be worth something. Edward calls dibs on the house and they all head off to find it. We have to take out a few small ships on the way and then cut our way through the jungle. We find Flappy Jack on his boat and waste no time kicking his ass. Edward tells him, "Pack up, weirdo, because it's all his now." Edward takes some time exploring his new island when we run into Mary, who says she believes in the distillery and wants to help find it. Edward tells her thanks, bro, and asks if she wants to go check out the new crib. She says, yeah, it's pretty cool, but she's got to get going, and Edward spends some time fixing the place up. A few days later, Mary came back and told us that while volunteering at the rehab center, she may have found a clue to the distillery, and we need to go check it out. She also says she can't afford to be seen hanging out with a drunk around there, so we have to take separate ships and meet in secret. Pulling up to this island, I know I have another big test of the rules coming up. I have to sneak in and meet Mary. The first two sections are nothing, just swim around the beach, then sprint through the jungle. It's the third part that caused all the trouble, because this area is crawling with security. I started thinking I could find a different way around, but there are way too many sightlines to keep track of, and the sniper at the end can see clear to the start. I struggled trying to get through these guys for a long time before I remembered that I fail if they see me, which means I'm allowed to use takedowns. The main trouble was going through the stalking zones. There's no rule against entering the stalking zones, I'm just not allowed to stay in them. But if I sprint through it, I get detected. My best option was to go through it and pull the right trigger every now and then to poke my head up and remove the stealth effect. That took me a good hour to figure out, but then it was smooth sailing from there until we got back to the sniper. I just timed my run carefully and activated the checkpoint, and now I can deliberately desync to end this nonsense and respawn right in front of Mary, ready to move on. She calls up for Dr. Tobai to unlock this door for us, and Edward wonders why he had to sneak in if he was coming to meet the boss. We all start talking about the distillery, and he says he also wants to find it to keep a steady flow of addicts coming into his clinic. Edward figures that makes sense, and they should work together. He tells us he has a statue of Parsley in his basement, and that Parsley's a very important man. On the way to check it out, Mary tells us that Parsley is an ancient being who has lived since before man and will live long after they're gone. She says his real name is Dan Aykroyd, and he built the original Crystal Head vodka distillery. Edward says that's a pretty neat statue, but what does Dan Aykroyd have to do with it now? And she explains that he has the only key to the door, but he can't be allowed to control it. If Dan Aykroyd is allowed to unleash endless spirits into the world, it would crumble the foundation of every society, and the world as we know it would devour itself. Edward says he can work with that, and notices that some goons have swarmed the clinic and are shaking down nurses for pocket change. This is unacceptable, and we decide to go whoop them. This is usually where one would unlock the sleep darts, and using them makes taking down the guards and freeing the nurses very easy. But with my rules, there's a very specific route you have to follow. And once I establish that route, I can make it look easy, but when I get down to the lower levels, the groups have multiple gunmen. By this point, I only need to save one more guy, but no matter what I do, at least one is going to die. I was a little bit slow, and two of them ended up getting shot. But we did it, and Mary points out the guy who sent the goons is a cartel boss named Prancer. Dr. Tobai thanks us for helping and compliments Edward's kicking ability, then tells us we're welcome back anytime if we ever want to get sober. Edward chuckles and heads to Nassau for a drink. At the bar, we run into Edward's old roommate Rick and his friend Tommy. We ask what they're doing here, and Rick says they just moved to Nassau and wanted to meet all the locals. So they all party with Mr. Beard and end up scheming to rob the governor's fort. They suggest sneaking in, but Edward says nuts to that, let's just trash the place. I easily tore down the defenses, then sprinted through a battlefield toward the war room. Edward was pleasantly surprised to find Larry in here, so we robbed him too. Somehow he escaped while we were defacing his nation's flag, but nobody was worried about it. We ran into him again about a week later on a bar crawl in Kingston. Wondering what Larry was up to around here, we followed him to a meeting with Prancer and overhear that he hired the cartels to find Dan Aykroyd, and Mary says we have to go break him out. Edward agrees, but reminds her that they still have a job to finish here. Once that was taken care of, we meet Mary outside Prancer's mansion where she says she has a plan to get the gate open, so she puts on some makeup and lets down her hair. Edward asks Mark what the hell he thinks he's doing, and she tells him for the last goddamn time her name is Mary, and she's a lady. Edward says this is the first he's hearing of it, and she asks why he thinks nobody else ever calls her Mark, and he says he doesn't listen when other people talk. She does her most feminine, flirty strut, and the guards open the gate, allowing me to just run in and beat up whoever gets in my way. We find Prancer just chilling by himself in the gazebo, so we tackled him down and gave him an innie. Edward stopped to laugh at him before finding Dan Aykroyd up in a room with Mary. He says he's got an appointment to make, so he can't stay and chat right now. Edward figured that was no problem. We'll probably see him again soon. On the way out, I made sure to find everyone who was still standing and fix that. A few months down the road, we run into Mr. Beard on Reefer Island, and he's in a bit of a scuffle. It seems he's gotten hooked on NyQuil and is attacking a shipment of it. The galleon carrying it is getting away, and he says we can use his ship if we help him take it. Edward takes the wheel, and for the first time in this run, I get a taste of some real firepower. Which is funny because usually I have the Jackdaw maxed out by now, and this mission feels like taking 10 steps back. This time I tore through them easy as you could scratch your arse, and scored a dramatic takedown on the captain, and then Mr. Beard was off with his cough syrup. 4 days later, while out sailing, we run into our old friend Steve. He's super happy to see us and tells us that Mr. Beard went through that whole shipment already and might need some help. Edward figures we should probably get to it, so we say our goodbyes and go looking for our friend. We find him out in a swamp, pacing around on his ship, and he says there's a whole warehouse full of Robitussin somewhere around here, but he's too messed up right now to get it himself. Edward says, yeah man, we can help, and we get to follow a boat through a swamp. I had some difficulty with a few awkwardly placed guards, but I stuck to the water when I could, and mostly just barreled through looking for checkpoints. Then we get a really fun action sequence to chase down the captain over fences and through fire, and once we catch him, we can take the warehouse key back to Mr. Beard and tell him he might want to slow down with that stuff. He says we got it all wrong and that he's been selling it to Tommy. Edward says that's fine then, and mentions he doesn't really like Tommy anyway. Back in Nassau, we're having a chat with the local veteran bar wench when we hear a ruckus on the beach. It seems the governor has shown up with a bunch of cops and a list of warrants, causing everybody to panic and scatter. A bunch of Edward's boys went with him, so we followed them to the fort to see what was going on, and I had a lot of fun with this one. It took me a little time to figure out a quiet way in, but once there, all I had to do was defend the alarm bell. I jumped in and made a fuss, and I let them all come to me. Made it all look easy, and before continuing, I took a minute to appreciate the rest of the fort. We got back to the meeting and learned that the governor was offering them all a plea deal. Scumbag Benny thought it sounded like a good deal, so he went with them, but Rick and Tommy told him to piss off. We meet up with Rick later at the bar, and he tells us the governor has locked down the dock, and nobody can leave the island. Edward starts whining about being bored, and says we can use some gunpowder barrels to blow up the blockade. Rick says that's a great idea, and then gives us a side quest to defend Old Man William's prize chicken from a group of angry vegetarians and escort it home. Oh yeah, the blockade. We drop the gunpowder off to Rick and tell him the Commodore is here, and we're going to go scrap him. Rick says that's cool, and we get a crazy tailing mission. The sniper up here on the roof was really the only problem, but getting around him caused even more. There are guards everywhere at ground level, but this is the only rooftop guy. If I can just get the timing right to stomp him so I can stay up here, it'll only be a matter of getting to a checkpoint. I got swarmed by guards up ahead, but it didn't matter. I just respawn at said checkpoint with nobody looking at me, and I can go around and follow the guy from above. I infiltrated the Commodore's ship, and I accidentally made the captain shoot him, and I had to do the whole thing over again. The second time around, I neglected the Grenadiers, and they blew him up. I decided I don't care. I didn't kill him, and I'm not doing that again. He could stay dead. We catch up to Rick down at the beach, and he says they loaded all the explosives onto Tommy's ship, and we're ready to break the blockade. We just have to defend the fire ship long enough to reach its target. This provides a little bit of a challenge because the cops stole our galleon and are launching mortars all over the place. The little ships are no threat, but if I'm not careful, those mortar volleys will shred my ship faster than my ex-wife trying to hide her tax information. By the fifth try, I had figured out the galleon's range, and I was able to wipe out all the little guys while taking almost no hits myself. Most of my damage was sustained during ramming, and that's only because I don't actually have a ram yet. Tommy's ship crashes through the blockade, wiping it out entirely, opening us up to make our daring escape. We speed through the stormy waves, straight to Edward's island mansion to lay low for a while. After several months that he doesn't remember, Edward gets a visit from Mary, who tells us Mr. Beard is retiring, and we're all throwing a big party for him. She gives us the time and date, and then gets a little flirty with Delio on the way out. Everybody is having a great time at the party, and Edward sits down with Mr. Beard for a while. They share stories about each other and some rumors about Dan Aykroyd, and there's a lot of people waiting to talk to the man of the hour, so we say goodbye and dip. And while wandering around blindly, we overheard some people talking about explosions. Edward likes explosions, so we followed them into the woods to see what they were up to. We followed them through the ruins, up to a cliff overlooking the beach, and it turns out they were planning a fireworks show as a send-off while Mr. Beard sailed into the sunset. One day, while drinking with Rick in Delio's room, he brought up the distillery, and Edward mentions a rumor that Dan Aykroyd is running a cartel ship. Rick says he's in and asks where it is. Edward tells him he doesn't know, and that we should just find someone who works for the cartel and ask them. We set sail to find some information, and this is where my own abilities get called into question. Within the main story, this is the most difficult naval battle. Rick's ship gets trashed right before the fight starts, so he's no help, and there's a fort nearby that I have no chance of destroying. There's just too much coming in too fast, and I needed to be able to hit them from much further away. Edward wished he hadn't used his Zeus power so early because he only gets one of those, and this is as far as I made it with the starting gear. I was now off to unlock the rest of the level 1 weapons, and adding the mortars made all the difference, and we took them down easily. Maybe a little too easily, but hey, I never said this was a starting gear only run. We hop aboard for a meeting with the captain and ask him where we can find Dan Aykroyd. He tells us right away, and we make plans to go there, but Tommy just now figured out that it was his ship we blew up escaping Nassau, and he got really mad about it until he freaked out and stole Edward's ship. Delio says he has to go with them because all his stuff is still on board. Rick says he could use a vacation anyway, so he and Edward go camping on this beach for a few weeks. Edward is having the best vacation ever. He's been swimming and fishing. He even gathered up a bunch of clams to keep as pets, and then named them after all his friends. However, Rick has never gone this long without liquor before and has completely lost his mind. He robs us at Stick Point and says he's taking all our pets and changing their names to Rick. Edward says, "Come on, man, don't be so shellfish," but he already took off running, and we have to chase him through the jungle while they shout seafood-related puns at each other until Rick finds a gun and some grenades. He's a shit shot, though, so this only irritates Edward further. We follow him to another area where he says something about being crabby because he's ugly, and then Edward tells him to just keep his hands off Mary's clam. Rick thought that one was hilarious, which distracted him just long enough for us to flank him. We smashed his face off some crates, then proceeded to beat the living shit out of him. He's still laughing about the Mary's clam joke, but manages to spit out a thanks and admits he probably deserved that beating. Edward tells him to just hurry up and pack because his mom's coming to pick them up in an hour. At the island mansion, Edward is happy to be back working with his friends. Even Tommy, because he's just an idiot who does impulsive things and everyone always forgives him. He takes off with Delio to find some weed, and we have a conversation with Mary about the distillery. Edward says he's close and we should be able to find our man in Kingston. She asks what we're waiting for, then tells Delio to stay safe before we set sail to Jamaica. Everyone splits up to canvass the neighborhood, and Delio finds a guy with some information. He describes two familiar dudes who were also here looking for a man named Parsley. Edward says we have to find Parsley first, and the guy says something else, but Edward wasn't paying attention and takes off to find Scumbag Benny and the governor. We run up into a search area, and I think everybody knows how these go by now. Just stomp out everyone until we find who we're looking for. Now I have to tail them to a meetup with Larry, then through a barn to drop some eaves. They all talk about finding the distillery, and Edward can't take it anymore, so he jumps down and calls Scumbag Benny a piece of shit. He didn't like that and sent his goons in, but if he thought that would stop Edward, he clearly doesn't know him very well. And once that was done, we headed back into town, where the guy from before asks what the hell we were doing, and says that he told us to just wait here a minute. He then calls Edward an idiot and informs us that Parsley had already been and gone before we even left the property. Edward says he doesn't want to wait for him to come back, so we'll just follow him to Africa. It's a pretty long trip, and we have to fight off some cartel ships along the way. Then we have a quick romp through the jungle where all that work finally pays off, and we come face to face with Dan Aykroyd. We tell him there are two other pricks on the island looking for him, and he gives us the go-ahead to beat the memory out of them so we can get out of here. I beat up everyone in here, and it seemed my game was bugged and the two guys didn't spawn in. So I restarted it and ran right to their ship where they were waiting for me. A grenadier tried to get involved, but I was paying attention this time and got out of range. The blast caught one guy, but it only knocked him down, so that was all I needed. I stomped him out, then knocked down his buddy and gave him a size 13 enema. We run back to the beach to tell Dan Aykroyd the cartels have been dealt with, and he gives us a map and says to meet him at that location. Edward didn't bother asking why, and we headed right out. Somehow he got there first and tells us he's found more of those mysterious crystals, and we have to go get them before we can go to the distillery. But first we have to steal a Portuguese flag for no particular reason, and Edward shows off his impeccable laundry skills by rolling a 40-foot flag perfectly with one hand while hanging from the top of the mast, and then heaving it into this indestructible rowboat. Then we just gotta stomp out everyone on this island and take their crystals. And then we gotta stomp out everyone on this island and take their ship. And now we get to play with some heavy-duty weapons while escaping to open sea. After the fights calm down, he shows us the crystals, but Edward still doesn't know what they are, so he just says that's neat and asks if we can go to the distillery now. He says sure and tells us where to meet him. On the way, we pass by one of Edward's old rum smuggling dens, and he sees that some cartel goons have taken it over. Edward says that we have to go evict them and that he knows a secret way in through the flooded mine tunnels. There's a big hungry shark down here, but luckily Edward took the animal friend perk and it doesn't bother us. We go beat up these couple of guys in here, ending this quick detour and getting us back on track. We catch up with Dan Aykroyd's ship, but he says this is as far as we go right now because it looks like scumbag Benny followed us and now we gotta go deal with him. We have to creep through the restricted area first to find him, and then we get a naval combat encounter, which really isn't hard now that I have access to heavy shot. After his ship's health is depleted, it runs aground and his crew makes their last stand in the ruins up ahead. I carefully and methodically took out every single person on this island. I wanted it to be just us at the end. I cleared the first part, then jumped over and cleared the second part, or so I thought. And when I got up to him, a grenadier was still about and he threw a bomb, which killed him. And I didn't see it happening quick enough, so I had to restart the whole mission, including the naval section. I cleared the island again, and I got up to him, but he was standing there with his captain. I tried to go after the captain first, but he pointed his gun at me, and when I tried to get out of the way, a son of a bitch shot him. I was pissed. At this point, I'm just sick of NPCs killing my targets. This is my story, and I'll damn well do as I please, even if that means having to clear this island for a third time. I got back to the second part and double-checked to make sure I got all the grenadiers, and then made my way up. I went right for the captain first, and now I finally have what I've been trying to set up all along. Just the three of us. Edward, Scumbag Benny, and me. I had something special in mind for this asshole, and I'll not waste any more words on it. I think we've all earned this. Once we were satisfied that he could no longer defend himself or pee standing up, we ended it with Edward's old pro wrestling finisher, the Jefferson Memorial. He crawls around grunting for a while, and when Edward's done laughing, he realizes he's had enough of this dummy and excitedly rushes back to Dan Aykroyd. Finally, after all these years of searching, he was going to get a tour of the first Crystal Head vodka distillery. Down at the beach, we're told that the jungle ahead is populated by an ancient tribe of security guards, and we need to go knock them all out to clear the way for the rest of the team. This place was kinda hard, I'm not gonna lie. Without eagle vision, I have to use other ways to find the security guards, and that's not easy. Especially since they use the blow darts, and it's almost impossible to track where they're coming from. I mean, it wasn't no 15 attempts kinda hard. I still got through just fine, but I got shot a lot while I was doing it. As the man with the only key unlocks the door for the first time in 80,000 years, he turns around and tells the other four guys that they can't come in. Edward says, "What the hell, man?" and complains that now he has to carry all this shit. We get to the end, and Edward asks what the mysterious crystals are for. Dan Aykroyd says that they're just flavor cubes that go into the top of the bottle. He pulls the bottle out, but instead of offering us a taste, he clobbers Edward in the face and knocks him off the ledge. He starts shouting something about misplaced loyalty, and he clearly doesn't understand Edward because he thinks this is the last he'll see of us. Ever resourceful, Edward finds a way out, but soon learns that that wasn't water down there, and his liver might be failing. Dan Aykroyd compliments our resilience, but rather than help, he plants 58 dime bags in our pockets and pulls out his phone. Edward asks who he's going to call, and he says the Jamaican police. Edward doesn't remember being arrested or having his stomach pumped, and didn't really come to until he was already in the courtroom awaiting trial. Turns out Mary and Bonnie the bar wench had gotten into a little trouble too, and were also standing trial today. Larry shows up with the governor and says he knows we've been to the distillery, and if we tell him where it is, he'll get us out of this. Edward says he's trying to watch the show and tells them to eat shit. Edward was sentenced to the gibbet cage, and he seemed mostly unbothered by it. He found it peaceful and passed the time by dancing and rattling the bars. One night he thought of a good joke and tried to lure the guards over so he could press his butt against the cage and fart in their general direction, but Dr. Tobai came strolling up the path, so he had to play it cool. Edward told him it's been a fun vacation so far, but he could really go for some sitting and eating right now, and Dr. Tobai unlocks the door and tells us not to worry because he's friends with the warden, and asks if we want to go visit Mary with him. Edward says nah, he'll catch up, as he's in the mood for a good old-fashioned prison riot. I like a good riot now and then too, so we run in full bore and just start whooping. I was a little too gung-ho about it though, and I kept making mistakes. Double counters are always fatal, so I have to reload on those. And there are 2 snipers up the laneway. By now, I'm so focused on watching for target alerts on the screen that I didn't even notice that A, I could just stay in front of this wall by the bell and I wouldn't have any problems, and B, the dog stepped on my mouse and now I have about 10 minutes of footage that looks like this. Once I figured both of those things out, I headed right for the guard tower, and this is the greatest rifleman fight I've ever played. There's a railing on all 4 sides. I can just indiscriminately spam the defense brake until they're in stomping range without worrying about anyone falling off. I actually waited up here for a minute in case any of these other yellow dots wanted to follow me up, but they can't climb like that, so I went down to tell them how disappointed I was. I thought about clearing the whole prison, but I'd already been doing this for half an hour and was ready to get it over with, so we head inside to go see Mary. Once everyone in there is dealt with, we tell Mary that the warden said we can go. She says that's okay, her sentence is almost up, and they're getting pizza for lunch tomorrow, and asks if we can just pick her up on Friday. Edward tells her no problem, and sets out to drop everyone else off at home. Later that night, Edward's having a great time at the bar when Dan Aykroyd unexpectedly shows up, and they split a bottle of Crystal Head. Just as the blackout started to kick in, Edward learned a valuable lesson about finishing the night on the top shelf. Come Saturday morning, Delio reminds us that we forgot to pick Mary up, so we have to rush back to Kingston. She's rightfully pissed off and spends the whole trip back shouting about how they wouldn't let her back in for the night and she had to sleep in the guard post at the front gate. After we drop her off, Delio says, "Hold up, we gotta talk." Edward's been working on listening to people, but he still drifts in and out. Delio mentioned hooking up with Mary at Mr. Beard's party, and then something about moving in with her. He then says he'll be volunteering at Dr. Tobai's clinic for a while in case we want to stop by and visit. We wish him luck and head out for more adventure. A few weeks on, Edward feels the ship is too quiet without Delio living in the basement, so we set course for Tobai's clinic to see how he's doing. It's not going well, though. Delio informs us that the clinic is over capacity and understaffed, and that this problem might be Edward's fault. Edward's not sure why it would be his fault, but he also doesn't ask. Instead, he just asks where Mary's at, and Dr. Tobai shows up to tell us that she's busy calming a freakout right now, and that ever since our visit to the distillery, Dan Aykroyd's been flooding the islands with enough premium vodka to pickle every liver on the continent. Not only that, the damn cartels are attacking the clinic again. Edward says don't worry, he'll take care of this, and struts off to the beach. With total disregard for the battlefield and my own personal safety, I rushed through everyone straight to the captain. I had a chance to pull him in front of a bullet, but I was paying attention this time and didn't. After I got shot, I knocked him down and shin-kicked him in the brainstem. With a quick escape, I can help finish the battle on the beach, and then head back to Dr. Tobai to give him the good news. He thanks us for the help and invites us to stay a while, but Edward says nah, he's got plans to stay at Mary and Delio's house for a few days. On the way over there, we run into Bonnie, who says she just got fired from another tavern due to corporate downsizing. Edward says that sucks and reminds her that Delio just moved out, and he's got a room for rent if she knows how to tie a bowline. She says she has no idea what a bowline is, but she's really good at telling men what to do, and Edward says welcome aboard. About 10 months down the road, our buddies stop by for a beer. Delio says he's sorry Mary couldn't be here, but she's at home with the baby, and Edward says, "What? No way, congratulations." Then Dr. Tobai brings everyone down by informing us that the crystal head epidemic is getting worse, and he's had to open up smaller clinics in all the major cities. He says it's pretty awesome and he's making mad bank, but having it all at the cost of men's souls weighs heavy on his heart. He also tells us that the only people working at his clinics are gossipy old ladies, so if we need any information on anyone, they'll have it. Edward thanked the boys for stopping by and headed off to Kingston for a horseshoe tournament. After the tournament was over, we decided to check out one of those pop-up clinics. Edward takes a shot and just bluntly asks this big scary nurse if he knows where the governor is. He says, "Yeah, sure, here you go, bud," and gives us a map and a plan to get there. Edward says, "Cool, thanks, but where are the gossipy old ladies?" And the nurse asks how many times he has to tell Tobias to stop calling him that. The plan is to take out a diplomat and steal his clothes and sneak into the governor's party. It starts with a simple, basic tailing mission, but it's here that I notice a very big problem. I cannot unequip the hidden blade. I thought about it briefly and realized I can't get him with any kind of takedown, so I got up high and thought I could tackle him, but every action but stab is disabled. No matter what I do, this man's gonna die, and I'm gonna be the one responsible for it. Edward's never done this before, so maybe he didn't hit anything vital and the guy's gonna be okay. Either way, he's getting stripped down and thrown into a hay bale so we can go to a party. The governor is hanging out with all of the biggest of the wigs here, and it'd be a real shame if someone teed off on his crotch in the middle of it all. Too bad that's not what's going to happen because I still can't unequip the blade. So instead, I'll just give you the solution to this mission. Take your first left onto the porch and sit on that bench. I can't use the bench right now, but still. He'll be here in a minute, and then you just gotta give him the old stabbity stab, and he's on the floor crying. I'm not as upset about this one because the governor survived this attack and fled to Europe at the end. Anyways, they bicker back and forth about the distillery for a bit until the governor says he was betrayed and his people are suffering. He tells Edward it's his fault the door opened and now it falls to him to close it. Kidney failure is at an all-time high and it's only going to get worse unless we could stop Dan Aykroyd from poisoning the world. And we learn he's back in Africa, so we begin the long voyage. Upon arrival, we have to fight our way across the island until we find him. When he spots us, he says we're too late and he's got to go. Edward tries to apologize and explains that he got held up a little because he hit like 6 different taco stands on the way. Dan Aykroyd doesn't want to hear it though, and he takes off in his ship, bringing us to a big naval battle. First, we have to chase him out of the cove, and it's a little tight, but right here's where I'm going to tell you that if I had just a little more patience in that section earlier and got through it without the mortars, then yeah, you can definitely beat this game with the starter gear. And now I'll point out that this ship is twice the size of mine, it's launching mortars and fire barrels, and just look at that hull strength. You might be seeing this thinking, wow, that's going to be a tough battle. And it would be if I actually needed to participate in it. As soon as we get out of the cove, there's a fleet of other ships that all start attacking him. It's pretty obvious right away what the strategy is here. I just have to hang back and avoid its mortars, and as long as I don't hit any of these other ships, they won't care about what I'm doing. So I just circle around, stay out of weapons fire, take a few pot shots till he's down. After all that is when the other ships aggro on me, but I don't care, let them kill me. If I desync, I just respawn right where I left off, and none of the enemies even know I'm still here. Now I can just board the ship, because checkpoints are awesome. As we climb aboard, we spot him immediately, and Edward channels his inner Goldberg by landing a spine-shattering spear. With a quick eye and a quicker foot, Edward threw down a single heavy stomp, leaving him paralyzed and whining about it. Dan Aykroyd went on a tirade about how it's actually Larry who's been shipping all the booze out, and that none of it matters because he's lived 1,000 lifetimes and will live for 1,000 more. He says humans may come and go, but Dan Aykroyd is forever. Edward tells him to stop pissing him off and calls him oregano. Without another word, Edward boarded his own ship and set course back to Havana. Bonnie asked why we were going there, and Edward told her they were going to grab a pint at his favorite pub while he figured out what to do next. Unfortunately, it seems Larry is already here in Cuba and has informed the local constabulary that Edward is a dangerous criminal. Edward figured they're probably right, then he threw stomps well into the night until the cops stopped showing up. In the morning, we found Larry's crew and tailed them to his house. Now detection is allowed, and it's just a free-for-all. I floored every chump who got in my way until it was down to just Larry. He put up no fight at all, and Edward triumphantly went 5 toes in. When he finally gets his boot out and rolls the guy over, we see it's not Larry at all. It's just some goober who looks like him. Edward was pretty embarrassed by this mistake and tried to just leave, but the police chief had enough and said it was time to fight. There are not a lot of options in here. The only way to deal damage is by shooting him. I did, however, figure out that I can hide from him in here, which means I can sneak up on him. I had him chase me around the fort for quite some time while I explored my options. I found out that after I take the first swing at him, all the attack buttons get disabled. I ran around in circles again for a while, and I'll admit I shot him a few times until I discovered that I can throw a punch while reloading my weapon. That still isn't within my rules, but it's progress. I climbed up this tower and he followed me up onto the wall. I said, "What's the worst that can happen?" and I hit him. He went straight into the water, which triggered the cutscene, but NPCs can swim in this game, which means I'm allowed to do that. So that was it, that's how I was going to beat him. I just had to be able to do it without shooting him first. I loaded back in and struggled to get him to climb the ledge without throwing a punch first, but he eventually did, and when it was time to strike, I walked up behind him, and the attack button was already disabled. That's when it hit me. I can't tackle this guy, because he will always jump out of the way. So I used that to my advantage, and I lunged at him. Dumbass did exactly what I expected him to do, and leapt sideways right off the wall down to the drink. And that was the last big boss fight completed, without breaking a single rule. After getting the hell out of there, we meet up with Bonnie at a pop-up clinic, and they tell us it's getting worse. These empty Crystal Head bottles are piling up in the streets, alongside endless, sleeping, bloated drunks. Edward says to prepare the ship. There's only one place Larry can be, and we're gonna hunt his ass down and work his groin like a malfunctioning brake pedal. And off we go. Since we haven't been clearing forts, all of the water is restricted area, and this is a treacherous run to the distillery. And when we arrive on the shore, we see Larry's goons have laid waste to the entire security guard village. Edward's pissed right now, and it's time he ended this. We get into the distillery, but Larry has activated the security system. I have to lure all the guards away from the lasers to knock them out safely, then carefully navigate around the dangers up to the ceiling where we make our approach. This is it. One final leap forward. Edward crushes him like a Koopa and relocates his testicles. He squirms around and in his new falsetto tries to explain himself, but Edward told him to shut the hell up and get out of here unless he also wants his teeth relocated. After all our friends had kicked Larry to the curb, they come back in to join Edward. He'd finally made it. He'd won his prize, and the endless Crystal Head vodka distillery was all his. Edward reflected on the last 10 years and everything he'd gone through to get here and came to the stark realization that as long as there are people who can't hold their liquor, a place like this can't exist, and he made the decision to lock the door and let it fade into obscurity. Dr. Tobai asked what of his prize, and Edward told him the true prize was the millions of dollars they all made along the way. With it all locked down, we headed out to sea, leaving the distillery to fend for itself. With the tribe of security guards wiped out, nature would again take over, burying it for another 80,000 years. It was on this voyage that Edward made the difficult decision to retire. Everybody was kind of bummed until they started planning the party. This was the first big shindig that Edward had ever thrown that didn't get shut down by cops or goons, and he made sure to spend as much time with all of his friends as he could. Hundreds of invitations were sent out, but not everyone could make it, and he was okay with that, because the people he cared about the most found their way back to him one last time.
Of all the money that e'er I had, I spent it in good company, and all the harm that e'er I've done, alas, it was to none but me. And all I've done for want of wit, to memory now I can't recall. So fell to me the parting glass. Good night and joy be with you all. Oh, all the comrades that e'er I had, they're sorry for my going away, and all the sweethearts that e'er I've loved, they'd wished me one more day to stay. But since it falls unto my lot that I should rise and you should. I'll gently rise and softly call. Good night and joy be with you all. Good night and joy be with you all.
Edward made it home to England to live the good life. He settled down and married his girlfriend and even adopted her stupid kid Sean. Edward never raised his heels in anger again, and that's going to be the end of our story. So, after all that, we ask the question, can you beat Black Flag without killing? Well, no. You're forced to kill one person. As I touched on in the story, Woodes Rogers canonically survived and fled to England, so he doesn't count. However, I can try to explain it away with funny words all I want, but we all know Edward murdered that diplomat. I actually teared up a little bit as I wrote the ending to this story. I didn't want it to be over. I wanted to stay in this world. But it's not really over, and if you want to stay in this world too, check out the Rogue episode, and make sure you stay tuned because this is a trilogy, and Sean will be back. I want to thank you all so much for experiencing this journey with me, and if you had fun and want to see more of this kind of stuff, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. But most importantly, stay crunchy. Goodbye!